Right. Okay. That's if it works. I guess it works. Right. No, I have tried it actually. So yeah, initially, so yeah, I was wanting to know a little bit of background to your involvement in the anti-Vietnam War movement. Um, so, what do you remember as your beginning of involvement? When did you first become conscious of it, and then when did you, develop that consciousness into?
Well, I was in a group that started in 1960, either late 60 or early 61, called the Anti-Fascist Youth Committee.
Right.
At that time, Kennedy was the president, and he was seen as liberal, especially by the die-hard right-wingers. They hated him, and it sort of led to the mushrooming of openly fascist groups in the United States. One of them was the American Nazi Party, headed by a guy named George Lincoln Rockwell. And it was that summer, I think, early of 61, that he announced that he was going to come to New York City. Some group that had a crazy idea that you got to, listen to all sides, and invited him. So it was a campus group to one of the schools in the city. So the people that I was working with, we decided we would set up this anti-fascist youth committee and call a demonstration against Rockwell. And it became a big issue because there was this pressure from the sort of middle of the road to more conservative Jewish groups that said, no, you'll just draw attention to him. But he was getting plenty of attention. There was a lot of publicity. And then there were, many of the people in our group were Jewish. And they said, no, this is not how you fight fascism. I'm trying to ignore it. So let's call a demonstration. So we called for a demonstration. It was our first action, really. And there was a dozen or so of us. We thought it would be a modest event. Well, this thing blew up so big that 1,000 people came out for this demonstration. Most of them were very young. A lot of high school students came, but also older people who with tattoos, numbers on their tattooed on their arms, wearing their concentration camp uniforms. Survivors of the concentration camps came. So it was a very dramatic and powerful demonstration. So we were very buoyed up by this, and we thought, we got to keep this going, So we did a few more things like that, and showing the danger coming from the far right. And also, I say that about Kennedy, that, there being a more liberal-seeming president seemed to provoke this. But we didn't have any confidence in Kennedy. It was more that we felt that there was a danger from the far right, and we knew, that they were against him, not for the same reasons that we might not agree with. So, 1961, the summer of 1961, an American soldier was killed in Vietnam. Now, he was not supposed to be, there were no combat troops there, supposedly. He wasn't supposed to have been a combat troop. But he was killed in combat. He was a so-called advisor to the South Vietnamese government. And his name happened to be York, Sergeant York. And it's the same name as, I think, one of the first U.S. soldiers killed in World War I, Sergeant York. It was just a coincidence,
Yeah.
But it was very sort of striking. Yeah. So we looked into what was going on over in Vietnam, and we thought, we've got to do something about this. This isn't just, something that's going to go away. And we could see, the whole Cold War situation that was developing, and how, and we knew, we learned something about the history of the people of Indochina and the struggle against French imperialism and the defeat at Dien Bien Phu of the French imperialists, and what the U.S. had done to sabotage the Geneva agreements after that. We looked up and we found out about all of this,
And this was you and how many others in the group?
Maybe 20 people.
Right.
Yeah, maybe altogether by that time. So we called the very first demonstration in the United States against the Vietnam War.
Wow.
It was in Times Square in, I think it was August of 1961. And I have old photos, but I don't think I have any here. But in the archives of my group, there have been old photos, the little photos back from
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
And we had a demonstration, and it wasn't not a bad demonstration. You know, it was like 30 or 40 people, and it was on 42nd Street in New York City. But it was the first thing, you know, that to draw attention to this war that the U.S. was involved in. So from then on, you know, we just were, our group grew as the knowledge of the war grew. We changed the name from Anti-Fascist Youth Group to Youth Against War and Fascism, because we felt war had to be in there. And we were, oh my God, I couldn't tell you how many protests and demonstrations and sit-ins and, you know, arrests. And I mean, I was arrested like 8 times in that period. But we were out there for everything, you know, every escalation, the Gulf of Tonkin hoax, everything, you know. I got arrested twice in Washington, D.C. around 1964, I think it was, when they tried to resurrect the House Un-American Activities Committee, what was called HUAC.
Yeah.
And they held hearings on the influence of, you know, Reds and Yippies in this anti-war movement, this new anti-war movement. Maybe it was 65. And it was in this very elaborate Senate building in Washington, D.C. But it was an open hearing, you know, open to the public. So we said, well, we got to go down for this and, you know, try to disrupt it or something. Because they were going to bring up all these, you know, admirals and people like that to testify. So we got there, and it was really incredible. You see, the draft was having a huge effect on young people. And they knew that they were, you know, going to get pulled into this if they didn't do something. So there were like 1,000 people came out to oppose this HUAC hearing. You had to line up, you know, to get in. The lines went around the block, and they were all, a lot of them were like 14, 15, 16 years old. Some of them hitchhiked to get there. I mean, it was amazing, you know. And we went in, and I remember getting up when some admiral was speaking and saying, "Admiral, you're lying!" And then they dragged me out. And everything was a lot more permissive in those days. I mean, now, you know, you would get slammed in jail and maybe held there for a long time. They took us down to the D.C. jail. We paid $10. We got out. We came back and we did it again.
That's the way to do it.
We came back and we did it again. So they had to shut the hearings down.
Right.
They were going to hold them for like a week or something. After 2 days, they closed them down.
Huh.
And they were, you know, sort of licking their wounds and trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do next? Meanwhile, it was clear that there was a rising youth movement, you know, against the war. So, but also, what happened, of course, during that period was that Kennedy was assassinated.
Yeah.
And there was an attorney who had actually been in the New York State legislature at one point. He'd been elected to the legislature, named Mark Lane. You might have heard of him. And he wrote a piece for a progressive weekly newspaper that existed that was called the National Guardian. He wrote a piece about the Kennedy assassination after Oswald had been killed too, and raised, from a legal point of view, you know, from a lawyerly point of view, he raised all these questions in his article. And it was like a bombshell that somebody would question this, because right away, you know, they had sworn in Johnson and, you know, quashed any idea that there was any kind of a plot involved in this and all of that. So I actually met Mark Lane not long after that publication of that, and to ask him, you know, what did he think could be done, you know, what could we do? And so he set up a committee, the Citizens Committee of Inquiry, and I was the executive secretary. I was in my early 20s. Was I? No, not early 20s. How was I by then? 63, 64. No, well, I was in my late 20s. But I was still like, to me that was just a big title. But I ran the office, and all kinds of young people came, and not young people, just everybody, lots of people came wanting to know how they could help further an independent investigation, because it was clear that the government was doing everything they could, to quiet things down. So because of that, and Mark Twain went on a tour in Europe, and at that time he made contact with the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation. And so I was in touch with them. Then, I guess the next thing that happened that put me in touch with the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation was that as the war was, in '65, there was the horrible massacres began in Indonesia. And again, it was a question of how do you get past all the, the sanitized story about what's going on. The New York Times, I wrote a book about it actually. Not a long book, but like a 100-page book. A lot of which is just showing what the U.S. press was saying at the time. Because the cynicism, you could see that in their eyes. Anything that happened, if it was done in the interests of anti-communism, well, that's, next subject, it was okay.
Yeah.
But it was more than that. And I think that this guy, Ralph Showman, who became Russell's secretary, he actually was in touch with people from the Indonesians who knew about the fact that the U.S. had some ships off the coast, that they provided lists of names to the generals in Indonesia, So I was very involved in that, and that, put me in touch with the people in England, and also, Indonesia. The U.S. was gleeful because they felt that this big setback for the left in Asia would help them win the Vietnam War. They saw it as a big plus at a time when everything wasn't going exactly their way, but in Indochina, but there, it went all their way. So it was very much linked in many ways. Then the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation asked me if I could get them photographs of the war crimes, U.S. war crimes. Because they wanted to have a traveling photo exhibit to go around in England and show to people what was going on in Vietnam. And it wasn't just them. It was the left wing of the youth of the Labour Party. They called it the militant tendency or something. They were kind of very energetic about this, and they wanted to get out more and do more about the Vietnam War. So I went to the offices of the UPI, United Press International, where they kept their photo archives. And I asked them, what would they have any photos from Vietnam, showing the guy gave me this stack of folders with the most incredible photos, big 8x10 glossies. Just one after the other, U.S. soldiers going in and burning villages and killing, just killing people, children burned by napalm. The whole thing, in these photos. So I picked out what I thought were the 20 or 30 most, damning ones. And I went back to the guy at the desk, and I said, can I have these, And he said, yeah, well, what are they going to be used for? And I said, well, they're going to be used for a photo exhibit. And he said, oh, okay, well, that would be $15 a piece. Well, to me, in our group then, I think the total bill would have been something like $500. We didn't have it.
Yeah.
We didn't have it. So So he saw my face, just drop, and he handed them to me. He said, "Why don't you take these home overnight and decide which of them you want?" So I looked at him and I, okay. So I took them right away to a photocopy place where I was able to get reproductions for $1 each. And I thought, they're going to England, they'll never get them on the copyright thing over there.
Yeah.
And I sent them over to the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation. So they did. Somebody over there made this ingenious folding photo display thing that could stick into the back of a car.
That's right. I remember hearing about this. You mentioned it on an email, but I'd written about that exact exhibit for my master's dissertation. So, I was aware of it. So it's fantastic when you mentioned it in your email. I was like, I know exactly what you're talking about there. No, that's great. And so with that, you then travelled to Britain, did you?
And then I was invited by the Peace Foundation.
Yeah.
But on behalf of this newly formed International War Crimes Tribunal,
Right.
to come over and work in the London office, and building up to the tribunal. So I think I went over just around the beginning of January. I just remember it was very dark.
It's like that for a long time. So this was January 60...
Of 67.
67.
1967. And and so I worked in the office. I handled a lot of the correspondence because people were writing in all the time. But I had other things that I did. I went and spoke at various places. Some of the stuff reading my own letters here that I had written back to the States reminded me of things I had done that I otherwise wouldn't have remembered. Like, for example, I just went hiking and I started from Newcastle on the Tyne. I'd been there before, and I had this deja vu feeling when I arrived there, but it just didn't click. Yeah. And then I read in one of my letters that I had just been at Newcastle on Tyne, speaking to an anti-war group at the campus there. Huh. So, and I probably drove it at night and didn't, and it was dark.
And so was this with the exhibit, or this was separate to travelling around with this exhibit in a car?
No, that would have been well, I think the exhibit may have been part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was.
And then this was you speaking as somebody for the Peace Foundation, or for the
War Crimes Tribunal.
For the War Crimes.
Yeah, I wasn't actually a representative of the Peace Foundation.
Yeah.
I represented the War Crimes Tribunal.
the War Crimes Tribunal.
But also as an American.
Yeah, of course.
From the anti-war movement in the United States.
And at which point you'd been a part of it for 6 years, at a point when most people
were just
getting into it.
Yeah, right. That's right.
And one of the things I wanted to ask was, obviously it goes without saying what really got you into it. The horror of it all is just overwhelming. But obviously there were domestic reforms which Johnson was attempting to introduce.
Was it the Great Society or something?
That's right, yeah.
Goes back to the days of Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
The Great Reformer, the Trust Buster and all that, and the war against, the war to take over Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. It's the same pattern.
Yeah, yeah.
Lighten up at home while you carry out your imperialist wars abroad.
And obviously it was, I don't know the figures, but just an outrageous sum of money was being pushed into this war effort.
Oh,
and so was it partly, were you in part protesting against the war because of the impact on domestic society?
Oh yes, and just generally, yes. Because a war thing like that, there's this big push to unify everybody behind the war.
Of course.
And just obscure the social contradictions at home, the racism, the exploitation of workers. All of that is, forget about all that. We're all Americans.
Yeah.
We've got to be behind the war effort. And so that was, very much, the stuff that I was involved in through Youth Against War and Fascism, it wasn't only about war. It was on other issues too, but the war was the thing that just got everybody going. It was especially for young people.
Yeah.
The war was the big overriding, that and the draft itself. The fact that you could, you had no control over your life. You got to be 18, that was it.
Yeah.
You could be drafted at any time. Andy actually had he went to the University of Pennsylvania, Penn State. And he was I don't know if he was in his freshman or sophomore year, but he spoke at a rally and he burned his draft card. It was around that time, about 66, I guess it was. That the young people were doing that, they were burning their draft cards. So, but they didn't do anything about it. They had, by that time, I guess, so many people were burning their draft cards that nothing happened to him. So he finally, thinking about the war, he decided, I'm going to go into the military and I'm going to organize. He went in.
Yeah.
He went to the selective service, not because he was called. He went there to be in the army. So, but there was so much potential because there were all these young people, most of them working class, whose whole lives were, hung in the balance. Everything was being disrupted, and all for what? And Andy was adopted. His parents were not poor. They were kind of middle class. His father had some little electronics company, Human or something. But they lived in a suburb of Philadelphia, which is a big, oppressed city, but has very nice green, leafy suburbs around it. And they belonged to a country club and all that kind of stuff. And to his parents, he was this crazy, how did Andy ever turn out this way? But he never lost his relationship with them. That's the kind of person he was. He was just he didn't antagonize unnecessarily.
It's interesting when you describe your stepfather and when you describe Andy. They sound similar in character. Would that be a fair assessment, that they weren't people who antagonized? They were people who were very strict with themselves and their views, but they were able to actually get on with people.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Well, in that respect, yes. I never thought of comparing them before, but they were different in a lot of ways. But in that sense, yes, they were both people who were persuasive and had a great amount of knowledge to back up what they were saying.
It's a great skill.
Who were not just, throwing out an opinion and,
Sure.
fuck this, and go ahead, but, gave a historical perspective to what they were doing.
Yeah.
It made people understand where they were at in history, you know?
It's a great skill. And being able to contextualize things for people, present it in a way that is, digestible for people. That's a fantastic talent. And so he then became, because I know he tried to unionize the army. That's what he was famous for.
Right.
And but was he? I can't remember because there was the resistance inside the army.
Rita.
Right.
Yeah.
And so was he a part of that? And then
I would say what he was doing was parallel to that, often in collaboration with Rita.
Yeah.
And some of the people who became members of the American Servicemen's Union had gotten to it through Rita.
Yeah.
It's funny, a friend of mine is writing a book about the resistance in the army.
Yeah.
And a lot about Andy, but he reminds me. I had my daughter in August of 1969, and so that was like 2 years after I'd met Andy.
Just saw the tail end of the 60s then.
Yeah, right. And I had forgotten this, but there was a big anti-war struggle that opened up in Hawaii because there were a lot of U.S. service people, say,
Yeah.
there, being shipped out from there and so on. And there was a church that was like a sanctuary church, and there were all these. There was all these people that he describes in his book, a meeting that was held where one after another, active duty people from the Army, the Navy, maybe even one or two airmen, got up, tore up their papers or whatever and said, I'm not going back to the thing. And they stayed. And Andy was going to go to that and be there for that, but I was about to have a baby, so he couldn't go. He decided at the last minute, no, he better not go. He better stay with me while I had the baby. So this guy who's writing the book went at Andy's place.
Right.
But Andy knew a lot of those people, and he did go out there later on. And he also knew there was a group from Europe, too, that had been in an anti-war organization in Paris. One of them was a guy who I still see quite often. His name was Terry Klug, and he was in what was the name of the group there? It had a name, and they were still, they had not, they were being hunted, so they would give interviews to videographers or whatever they called them in those days, behind sheets, speaking behind a sheet, and so I'm talking about encouraging other GIs to drop out of the Army, But they came from all over. I mean, and there were a lot of forms of resistance. Some of the left groups in the United States took kind of rigid positions. You shouldn't resist the draft. You should go in. But they didn't do much once they got in, frankly. But we always took the position, any way you resist is fine.
Sure.
Burn your draft card if you want
Yeah.
to. Go into the military to organize.
Yeah.
Try, if you're not directly involved, help the people. There was the coffee house movement of providing some place for GIs to meet off base where they could just talk to other people, not in an atmosphere under the thumbs of the officers, and the bond at one time it circulated something like 30,000 copies. I mean, it went
It's
all
incredible.
over.
It's incredible.
I know people now, I still know, one guy who was a mail dispatcher in his unit. He was the guy who passed out all the mail that came in. So he would just pass out the bond along with the bond was the ASU's newspaper.
Yeah, that's right.
Along with their mail to everybody.
Wow.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was mild compared to what some of them were doing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them, really risked their lives.
Yeah.
Especially the ones who were over there. Hated every bit of it.
And did Andy actually go to Vietnam, or
No.
he didn't because
No, he
of
never got sent. No.
Yeah.
He was court-martialed a couple of times on sort of minor offenses. And then there was a field board hearing where they put him out of the military. But that thing, he wrote a book, Up Against the Brass. Do you know about this
Yes,
book?
yeah, I do know.
It describes all of this
Yeah,
in more
yeah.
detail than I can do here. But
Yeah, I know of it.
I tell you, it was a time that was very scary in one sense, but so exhilarating because people were changing so rapidly, and beginning to understand they had the power to do things that they had never thought they could before.
Sure.
So at that field board hearing, I mean, Andy had some leave from his unit. He was he was just a private E1 or whatever they call it, and he had had one disciplinary thing where he was punished by having to hump ammo for a month, meaning pick up all these cases of heavy ammunition and put them on trucks. So when I met him in a swimming pool. I went down there to go to his court-martial. They wouldn't let us on the base. They barred us from the base, which was illegal because it was called an open public court-martial, but it wasn't. And then, but it's a basic training base. There's nothing secret there. So men come and go, you know. And so once the day was over, and he was acquitted in his court martial of this stupid charge of having literature, you know. They couldn't convict him for that. He and a whole bunch of the GIs came off the base at the end of the workday and met with us at this motel where a couple of people were staying. And so I met him in the swimming pool at the motel, and I thought, oh, this guy looks great, you know, because he had been humping ammo for a month. He had all these muscles. It's not characteristic of him to be doing that, but he had to at that time. He looked damn good.
So you obviously knew about his activities at this stage, and he knew about your involvement in the War Crimes Tribunal, did he?
Well, that came after. No, wait a minute. No, I'm sorry. No. Yes, of course. Yeah, I'm getting mixed up my own mind. That's right. This was right after the tribunal that I came back to the States and then went down there. Oh yeah, he knew all about it.
Yeah.
I think at one point we were even thinking that maybe he would go over to Europe, but there were other things that he had to do regarding the ASU. But getting back though to the time in Britain, because I think you'd want to know sort of more.
Oh no, it's all fascinating, but and particularly interesting for me having, read about him, and I mean he features a very small part of my thesis. I said it was my master's thesis. It was actually my undergrad. I wrote about him. So.
That's you did? You wrote about Andy?
Yeah. Briefly, I wrote about the GI movement for my undergrad dissertation, and so that's why I first became interested in the anti-Vietnam War movement. I just found it fascinating that the army just went, what's going on here? And so that's when I heard about him and this attempt to unionize the army, which I just thought was the most audaciously brilliant thing anybody had ever thought of. And so, fascinated by it. But because my research went down a different route, I went to look at the British opposition to the war. That was sort of sidelined, so I never sort of carried on with writing about him in particular. But then part of my master's thesis was a chapter devoted to the Americans who resisted, because there's nothing else written about it. So partly why I'm doing it now for a PhD thesis is that it's not been written about. I'm fascinated in it anyway, but so now I'm kind of coming back to where I was with my undergrad in a way. So coming across his name regularly, and people like David Courtwright, lots of others who I had been writing about for my undergrad, and now. But to get back, if you don't mind, briefly to your time in Britain, there were a number of groups who were operating, military and civilian. Group 68 being one, and Peace being another for the military, and then the Stop It Committee. Do you know of any of those?
Stop It Committee sounds familiar. The other two, not familiar. Group what? Group 88?
Group 68.
68.
Yeah, set up in 68.
Oh, 1968.
So I suppose this was actually after you came back.
Yeah.
So that's perhaps why you. Yeah. It was set up by a guy called Heinz Norden.
Oh yes, I knew him.
I thought you might.
Heinz Norden, yes.
Yeah.
Well, he worked with the tribunal.
Ah, I didn't realise that.
Yeah.
Because I've just, at the Tenement in New York University, last couple of days I've been going through Heinz Norden's papers, but just specifically on Vietnam. But when I was there, I noticed there was quite a lot on the tenants' rights in New York City that he was involved in before. But yeah, he was in England for years and years and years, and then once the war, protesting against the war, sort of fizzled out in '73, he changed the name from Group 68 to Concerned Americans Abroad, and it was broader. I mean, they looked at lots of issues that America was involved in that they felt was rather unsafe.
Hans Norden. I had a friend who's the one who's writing this book about the army, about the resistance in the military.
Yeah.
I think he's not German, but he's fluent in German, and he knows a lot of German-speaking people. And I think Heinz was German.
He certainly sounds it. Yeah, I think his parents were German. Then I think they emigrated either when he was very young, or I think it was when he was very young. Actually, he was about 5 or 6, and they moved to. I think, did they move to London? I can't remember. And then on from there. So he had connections with London. So then they came to New York, and then I think he moved back. But tragically, he was killed in a car accident in London in 75 or 6. So.
Well, the name is very familiar. Yeah. I'm sorry I can't unravel my memory more.
It's fine.
But I definitely knew him, yeah. I mean, the two Americans that I remember being most actively involved.
Ralph Sherman.
Well, besides Ralph Sherman.
Right.
In the setting up of the tribunal were Stokely Carmichael, who was one of the judges, and Russell Stetler, who was also very active in the United States in building a group against the war.
Yeah. Now, Russell Stetler, I think he was on that list. I can't remember if I was able to contact him or not. I can't remember. Is he still alive?
I don't know.
Can't remember. Obviously, Stokely Carmichael isn't, but yeah. I mean, there were interesting connections there with the Black Power movement, and how the Brits were so paranoid that the 60s experience of America would traverse the Atlantic and infect Britain.
The issue of racism against African Americans in relation to the war is a very big factor in the dissolution of the chain of command. Because by '68, when the Democratic National Convention was held in Chicago, when King had been assassinated, there were huge rebellions all over the country, in the black communities. And Chicago had been a big one, and they had called in the National Guard. And then came the Democratic National Convention there, some months later, and there was a group of black soldiers at Fort Hood in Texas who sat down in the middle of the base and said, because they'd been issued orders to go to Chicago, supposedly, to protect the convention, but they were worried that they were going to be used against the black community. So the ASU sent a couple of organizers down to Fort Hood. The guy who's writing this book is one of them. His name is John Catalnato.
Right.
And he went down to Fort Hood along with another person, and they met with the black GIs who were, kind of like, well, who are you? But they said, well, we'll try to get you legal help. And they did, they first of course, they got arrested and kicked, when they went on the base to meet with these guys, even though it was supposed to be legal. They got arrested. They got, the two of them, they got dragged down to, the county, whatever building or something, and some judge, said, okay, they were arrested for vagrancy. And so they said, what do you mean vagrancy? We have $200 on us. And the guy said, fine, $200.
What a bastard. Yeah, learn to keep your mouth shut, I suppose. Yeah.
But they went and got legal help for these GIs, and then there were a number of cases involving black GIs who resisted, and also people who refused the draft. One of them came to Andy's the memorial for Andy, a really sweet guy. I remember when he was with the group when we went to Fort Sill to try and attend that court-martial. I told you we couldn't get to.
Yeah.
They took us to the Judge Advocate General's office because they had to serve us a bar order before they could arrest us for going on the base. So they took us to the Judge Advocate General's office in order to serve us these bar orders. There were about, I don't know, 8 of us or something. We had 2 cars that had driven down from New York, and they took us all to there when we first got there. Well, this is what happened. When we first got there, you go through a gate, and they had already barred 2 of our members who had been there all along. There were the 2 who were like helping getting out publicity and stuff like that. And they had been already served bar orders. So when they were with us in the car to go to the court-martial, they were arrested. They each served 6 months in federal prison for trying to go back on the base. And, in a public way. I mean, they didn't sneak on or something.
And what do you remember what year that was?
That was 1967. That was 1967. They each served. I know I went down to Oklahoma City to get the bail money to get them out, and then they were tried and found guilty, and they were sentenced to 6 months in federal prisons, and they had to serve their time. And then what happened was they turned our car back. After they arrested these 2, they turned the rest of us back. So we drove to a payphone, because you didn't have cell phones in those days, and we called this lawyer in Denver that we knew of, and we said, what can we do? Is there anything we can do? They can't say it's a public court-martial, but they won't let us on the base. And he said, well, have they issued you bar orders yet? We said, no, just to Marianne and Key. They arrested them. He said, well, they can't arrest you trying to go back on the base. They might issue bar orders. So that's what happened. We came in a back way. I mean, it's a big base, there's all kinds of ways to get on the base. We drove around, and we come onto the base, and we know there's a helicopter that's following us, right? And we see there's some trees, it's a hot day. We see a Jeep, an MPG, military police, pulled over to the side of the road, and 2 guys like this on the grass, like start swaying out of the heat. And as we drive by, we hear their shortwave radio bark. And they jump up. It's the helicopter telling them, they've come back on the base. So they grabbed us, they followed us, pulled us over, took us to the Judge Advocate General's office. Yeah. I'm telling you all this because one of us was this guy who was a draft resistor, and he was very tall, African American and Puerto Rican both, and he had somebody had a camera. I don't think it was actually him. One of us had a camera and was surreptitiously trying to take pictures while they were barring us. So the colonel, this was like the British in India or something. You always get the subaltern to do the job, the dirty work. Yeah. Tells this lieutenant or something to get that camera away from them. So this guy had the camera. He just went like this, just stood there like this, like a basketball player with his arm way up in the air. Really tall guy. And this little lieutenant is going, trying to get it. And all these GIs who worked there at the Judge Advocate General's office, typists, messengers, whatever, they're crowding in the doorways, watching and laughing. And in the meantime, somebody took some of our literature and stuffed it into the jacket pockets of the officers, because they had a coat rack that was just for their jackets,
That's fantastic.
I mean, this is the spirit of resistance. Right there,
absolutely.
In every way, anything that people could do, they did, to get away with it.
That's
so
fantastic.
then we were issued the bar orders, and then if we had tried to come back again, we would have all been arrested.
So it's interesting. I mean, with that's a fascinating account of that. The excitement that you guys must have had, the experiences that you guys must have had. It's and the camaraderie of it as well. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioning how you got this legal help. Just briefly, you
Yeah.
spoke to somebody, and it throws up another question of financing and how much help was given pro bono, and other people who became involved. I mean, obviously you had very little money. I mean, there was no not huge wealth there. How did you generate money?
It's, I mean, we had, first of all, nobody got a salary. I mean, I spent years of my life working part-time as a temp. So that when something would happen that I wanted to be a part of, I could be a part of it, know. But while maintaining my life, being able to live, eat, have a place to stay. It was a lot easier then than it is now.
Right.
I think of it so often, my daughter is 47 years old. She's still paying her goddamn student loans. I mean, it's terrible now for young people. And she's not that young, but it's even worse for the ones younger than her, you know. But when I never went to college. Well, I went to college I did. I went to college for a year and a half, but I dropped out. It was in the 50s. College was horrible. Oh my God, it was so reactionary. The University of Buffalo, which at that time was like a private school, but later became part of the New York State University system. They had the whole McCarthy period had gotten rid of anybody in the faculty who was the least bit progressive. There was one guy left. He was in the philosophy department,
right.
So he could sort of get away with being a philosopher.
Of course, yeah.
But history, I mean, the guy who was the head of the history department, one of the classes I had to take, it was a lecture class. You couldn't ask questions. You just sat and listened.
Yeah.
And he was the head of the department. And he explained World War I this way. Well, Kaiser Wilhelm had a withered arm and felt inferior, so he had to show that Germany was superior. That was his explanation for World War I. I mean, that's how bad it was. Yeah. How really horrible. So
not terribly nuanced, is it? Really?
So I had to the hell with college. But I could go and get a job. I got a job working in a hospital as a lab technician. Nowadays, you got to get 2 years in some special school to become a lab technician, when it's much easier than what we used to have to do, because we didn't have all this machinery that did blood counts and stuff. We had to do it all, everything was just much easier for young workers to survive. A week's pay would cover my month's rent. Nowadays, it takes 2 weeks' pay to rent an apartment. Yeah. At least, I mean, at a regular job, not a special job. Yeah. So your question was, well, how did we survive? So it wasn't as difficult economically to build up an army of volunteers in those days. That was part of it. But then, it was so interesting. I remember people coming and giving us money in the most amazing ways. There was a woman, we never knew her name. We called her the lady with the hat. She was white, she was a Southerner, she had a deep Southern accent. She was very pale, she always wore big hats that sort of shielded her face. She came once and handed me an envelope and then disappeared right away, right? It was a check for $5,000. I know, $5,000 in those days will give you a lot of demonstrations.
I mean, that's a heck of a lot of money today.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this was where you had offices?
We had an office.
And this was where? In
New York City.
In New York City.
Yeah, on 21st Street in New York City. And we had seen her, she had been in and out. Another time she came.
And this was the ASU office?
No, this was the Youth Against War and Fascism.
Youth Against War and Fascism.
Yeah, right, I worked out of that. The ASU probably had similar things happen, but no, I worked out of the Youth Against War and Fascism office. And this was a woman who clearly was traumatized by the racism in the South. Yeah. And probably her own family. Yeah. That's what I felt, and that she had money from her family and she hated what they stood for. Yeah. But I mean, it was just interesting. I mean, people would come and give you contributions. That same woman, by the way, this was after I was married to Andy. She came once and handed me a shoebox, and then again disappeared, And I opened it up, and it was a pearl-handled revolver. I didn't know what to do with it,
Yeah.
So Andy's parents had a place in the country, so we took it out there. Well, you couldn't hit the side of a barn door, with it. I mean, it was not very calibrated right or anything.
What do you think she was expecting? Did she think you could sell it, or just?
I have no idea what she thought.
Interesting.
I have no idea what she thought. But she probably was thinking back to the times when there was lynchings, and if the people had guns, they could have fought back. She felt passionately the anti-racist, anti-war struggle, Anyway, that's just a couple of anecdotes of, most of our money didn't come that way, it came in small amounts.
Yeah.
We put out a magazine called The Partisan. It was a Youth Against War and Fascism magazine called The Partisan. The ASU put out The Bond. I'm sure contributions came in to The Bond, smaller, but you have a big effect on people, and a lot of people will give you some support. They want you to keep going. And
so, did your group support the other groups, or did they vice versa? Did you work together?
Financially,
not necessarily financially, so in terms of generally working together and protesting.
There was overlapping of personnel in some cases. We would publicize. I also worked on the newspaper Workers' World, which I still do.
Yeah.
And we would write articles all the time about what the ASU was doing. What was going on.
And the Workers' World, was that set up by your father?
Well, he was one of the people. It was started in '59.
Right.
1959. It was funny. It was just a few months after the Cuban Revolution. We didn't know what to make of it, the Cuban Revolution at the beginning, but we quickly found out, because people won't even remember this, but there was this little window of time, and this was the cunning of Fidel Castro, when they were consolidating their revolution and trying to keep U.S. imperialism from, targeting them. Actually, when they were still in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, the New York Times sent one of their editors down, a guy named Herbert Matthews, to meet with Fidel in the Sierra Maestra. And later on, when there were books written about that, it turned out that he impressed this guy, Herbert Matthews, with their strength by having the same troops keep going past, and then they go around some other way and come by again. And make it look like they were more than they were.
Yeah.
But the Times, at that point, they wrote about Fidel's group as though, if they're anti-dictatorial reformers, like they weren't going to go beyond that. And we didn't know, we just didn't know whether that was the case or not. But if you read now, like I think Tad Schultz wrote a big book about Cuba, where he says that from the time, the revolution was like January 1st. Within a week or so, the U.S. was already, looking for ways that they could intervene.
Yeah.
So they right away they had figured that this was a dangerous development from the point of view of the interests of U.S. imperialism.
Yeah.
And so they they were trying to figure out what they could do to set them back and make sure that it didn't go further. Because the first things they did were there was the literacy campaign. They didn't take socialist steps until the Bay of Pigs invasion. I know. I was in the July 26 movement's office in New York City in the middle of the Bay of Pigs invasion when Fidel Castro came on shortwave radio. And there were all these people packed in to hear what he was going to, because they knew he was going to speak. And all of a sudden, they were all jumping up in the air and throwing, they wore berets, throwing the berets up in the air and hugging each other and everything. And I said, what did he say? What did he say? Because I knew some Spanish, but it wasn't good enough. They said, he just said, we have made a socialist revolution under the very noses of the U.S. imperialists. And to them, what that meant was that they were not going to go back.
Yeah.
You know, they were not going to allow this revolution to be turned back by this military venture by the U.S. And then, of course, you know, they defeated it pretty quickly, considering everything.
And then there was. Did your group then support Cuba? I mean, there were groups that.
Oh yeah, by that time I was already involved in support for Cuba.
Yeah.
There was the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
Yeah.
There was what else? There was. There were just a lot of things that happened fairly quickly. Oh yeah. How can I forget? I first came to New York City at the very beginning of '61. It was right after. The Cuban Revolution was 59 to 60, right? No, it was January 1st. 59. 59. I was not in New York then. The Bay of Pigs invasion was in like April of '61, which was a little over 2 years. And I went to New York at the beginning of '61. I think I arrived in New York City on at the end of January of 1960. And on that January 2nd, or the end of December, I were in New York at the end of December of 1960, then it became '61, and the U.S. announced at the United Nations that they were breaking diplomatic relations with Cuba. We were already close enough to the Cuban movement to know that was going to happen. I was with Vince Copeland, you know, my stepfather, and a bunch of Puerto Rican guys attending the session of the, must have been the Security Council, which was at that time open to the public. It's not anymore. When this guy Wadsworth, who was the U.S. ambassador at the time, announced that they were breaking relations. And we got up. There were the right-wing Cubans were also in the audience. So when the Cuban ambassador to the UN spoke, they booed and made a big fuss. And when Wadsworth spoke, we got up, booed, and made a big fuss. And that was early January in 1961. And I had just come to New York City. And almost immediately, I don't know, I hope I've got my dates right. Oh yeah, I had not been in New York when Fidel came and spoke at the UN in November of 1960, and that's when he went to the Hotel Teresa. I wasn't in New York yet. When that happened, when he was in New York, there was an incident, a killing actually, that was blamed on a pro-Cuban worker, a pro-revolutionary Cuban worker. His name was Francisco Molina. He was just a young guy, worked in a factory, had lost a hand when a month after he got his job there, and had an artificial hand. At the time when Fidel was in New York and about to speak at the UN, there was a restaurant on 50th Street in New York, which at that time was a Cuban neighborhood. And there was people eating, and a bunch of Cuban counter-revolutionaries who had been, we found this out later, had been flown up from Miami by the CIA to demonstrate against Fidel. They started a fight with this restaurant. This was a Cuban restaurant. There were a lot of pro-revolutionary people who hung out there. they started a fight with them, and a little girl, Venezuelan girl, with her eating in the back with her father, was killed by a stray bullet. The day after, so everybody ran out. The day after, the police arrested this Cuban guy, this Cuban worker, Francisco Molina, who had been one of the people in the restaurant, and charged him with the killing. No gun was found, nothing. The whole trial against him was based on the testimony of these counter-revolutionary Cubans. The whole trial. Now that trial happened after I had come to New York, and I became the secretary of the committee to defend Francisco Molina. So I had a close relationship with the Cuban community in New York City. And it was such an incredible trial. I wrote a pamphlet on that too. I don't know if I can find a copy of it, but all these guys testified against him. When the defense attorney wanted to cross-examine them about their military experience, the prosecutor immediately jumped up and said, "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" And so they both went up. And he told the judge, you can't allow this on the grounds of national security. You can't allow them to answer this question. And so the judge said, okay. So they couldn't be cross-examined about their military experience. So that trial was something like in March of '61. And in April, every one of those guys that testified against Molina was captured at the Bay of Pigs.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. They were all captured at the Bay of Pigs. I mean, the whole thing was just a total frame-up thing, and because when Fidel spoke at the United Nations, what were the headlines on the papers, the New York papers? Francisco Molina, the hook, kills this kid. Pro-Castro guy kills this kid. Those were the headlines, not what Fidel had to say at the UN.
Yeah.
It was all, so these, and then of course it turned out they had been getting military training, and I don't know how the defense attorney found out about this, maybe from some of the Cubans themselves. While, before they came to testify against him to the trial, and they had been brought up for this fight, and then they were brought back up again to testify at this trial, and then they all got captured. So when finally there was an exchange, a prisoner exchange, and the Cuban government released the 1,000 or so counter-revolutionaries that had been captured at the Bay of Pigs, the U.S. had to release Francisco Molina, who they had claimed all along was not a political prisoner. This was a criminal case. They had to release Francisco Molina.
So then did he go back
he went to Cuba?
Cuba?
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no hanging around here.
Oh, no way. No.
That's fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
It's no surprise how you and others at the time became so politicized, and I mean, just shocking, really. And then seeing how you, and I suppose this is, again, something. It brings me to, or perhaps you've answered it, but how. Obviously I know that your protesting's continued, it's been a central part of your life, but when you look back specifically on the 60s, not just Vietnam, Cuba and, civil rights and, that era, what do you think your protesting, because obviously there's debate over what protesting actually achieves. What do you feel it achieved back then?
Well, I think it achieved a lot. Cuba survived, and mainly because of what they were able to do to defend themselves, but also because of the support they got from around the world.
Yeah.
This pro-Cuba sentiment in the United States is very deep in a big swath of the population. There's something called Pastors for Peace. It was headed by a really wonderful African-American minister who died just a few years ago. But he went down there every year. He would go down with a group that traveled all around the United States, gathering stuff to take to Cuba that they couldn't get because of the blockade. You know, computers. This is the thing with the little yellow school bus. They would have this little yellow school bus, and largely it was churches that would sponsor these tours. But they would go with placards on the side and slogans on the side of the bus. I mean, just to show you the depth of it, you know. And then Cuba opened this school, this medical school that people could come to for free. And, you know, I mean, I guess they had to take tests and stuff like that. And they gave priority to people from poor backgrounds, and if they were coming from the United States. So there was a lot of people who graduated with, you know, degrees in medicine. And you know, and I mean, there's a feeling of real patriotism towards Cuba, I guess you could say, especially from Latin Americans living in the U.S., but you know, from a lot of other people too, who just see it as a really wonderful example of a society that's came after the most brutal dictatorship, and right away, you know, did whatever could be done to try and improve the living standard of the people. I've been to Cuba a bunch of times, and I'm blown away. Actually,
how was that possible with because American citizens?
Well, yeah, there was an African American journalist who wrote widely. Not just for black papers, but he wrote for the Boston Globe a lot. He wrote a wonderful article once for their magazine section, all about us, about you think us weren't fascists. His name was William Worthy. There was a song that got written, William Worthy Isn't Worthy Anymore. Phil Oakes used to sing it. It was about him. They took his passport away because he went to Cuba.
Huh.
Yeah. But it was kind of weird. It was a weird thing. I mean, when did I go the first time? Sometime in the 60s. And this is what I had to do. I flew via Mexico to Havana, but I couldn't come back through Mexico because the U.S. had it set with the Mexican government that they wouldn't allow that. So I had to come back by way of Spain. I know.
Good Lord, that's a
So I got on a
way.
plane, flew across the Atlantic one day, stayed in an airport hotel in Madrid, saw a thing that looked like a little small tank this was under Franco, on the tarmac that said Polizia or something like that on it, and it had a turret for a machine gun, and I was like, oh boy, I'm going to get out of this country quick. And then flew to New York the next day, you know. I mean, it was not easy to do, but I was coming from Spain, so when I entered the United States, and the Cubans don't stamp your passports.
Right.
So they didn't know.
Fantastic. So you went a number of times.
I went a number of times, and after that, it wasn't quite so hard. I mean, you could go other ways. You could go by way of Mexico and come back by way of Mexico eventually.
And obviously with...
But you couldn't spend money.
Right.
You couldn't spend money.
So how did you deal with that?
Invited.
Charities
You were
of seeing
invited.
people. You were guests,
Yes,
basically.
you were a guest. Yeah. I was there during the special period. You know, this was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when they had it so tough.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something that so impressed me about the leadership. I mean, we met with some of the top people.
Did you ever meet Castro?
Oh yeah, I've shaken his hand at a reception or something. We didn't have well, we did have a little. We had a discussion with him, but it was brief. But we had a longer discussion with what's her name? The woman who was the head of the Women's Association, and others on their central committee. And in that special period, they were just as thin as everybody else. And when you went to the office of the central committee, the lights were out. You would walk into a dark room and they would turn on one light. They did not allow any favoritism. You know, it was a hard time. And that's the secret of how they were able to survive what would have brought a government anywhere else down. The decline in the living standards for the first 4 or 5 years was horrific. Because they couldn't get food, they couldn't get anything. You know? But they were, I remember meeting with a woman who was, I think she was Raoul's wife, and she was wearing a blouse, and it had a little tear in the collar, you know. I mean, I thought, good for them, you know. No pretense here. No, I'm important. I got all this spiffy clothes. Nothing like
Yeah.
that. Just the opposite.
And do you think that continues to today?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, not that there aren't people who get seduced by the idea that they could maybe get rich or something.
No, it's...
but among the Cuban people, I think, you know, they've had 50 years now
Yeah.
or more to
It's
figure
interesting.
this out.
I've not been to Cuba,
Yeah.
and I'm very much looking forward
Yeah.
to going,
Yeah.
perhaps before the explosion over there, which is undoubtedly going to happen over the next few
Yeah,
years.
well, they're trying to keep, you know, some control over
Let's
the whole
hope
thing.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, obviously, having lived in Vietnam for the past 5 years, it's, you know, they're doing it their way and it's the way it should be, but it is unfortunate how corrupt it is. It's
Yeah.
a terribly corrupt
Yeah.
society, and I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
dear old Ho Chi Minh
Yeah.
turning in his grave, looking
Yeah.
at it, it's a
Yeah.
real shame.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to come to pieces at some point. I mean, there's
Yeah.
only so much of seeing government officials, fairly lowly government officials, driving around in $300,000 Bentleys. Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's disappointing. It really is. But no, that's interesting that Cuba's maintained a sense of.
You know, I didn't tell you about yet, and this also had to do with my getting to know the people at the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation. In '65, I went to Prague, Czechoslovakia, to meet people from the NLF.
I was going to ask about this, whether you'd either been to North Vietnam or South Vietnam at the time, or whether you'd met members of the NLF.
I met they had
Prague.
in Prague. They had an office, very bare bones, you know, situation.
Yeah.
And I was there for a week, and every day they would have a meeting with me, especially this one wonderful young guy named Pham Van Chuan. Anyway, I have letters having to do with him. And I remember one day he said, today I'm going to tell you about our Vietnamese Air Force. And I said something, oh, I didn't know you the South Vietnamese, the resistance front.
Yeah.
I didn't know you had an Air Force. He said, well, this is how it works. And he described how they would somehow capture a uniform that an American soldier had worn. And they would train wasps and bees that, by, I guess, hitting their hive or something and putting that uniform there, to hate that smell, which was the different. He said in a very sort of a slightly embarrassed way, he said, you know, you Americans, you smell different than the Vietnamese.
Yeah.
And then, if they ever came near where there was going to be wasps and bees, they would get stung horribly.
I've never heard that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. But they were, every day, you know, they would talk to me about different aspects of what was going on in the war. And then they took me to Lidice, which is this coal mining. You've been.
I've been. Yeah.
You've seen that museum. You know, they have a in the basement. They have a film theater.
Right.
And they showed a film that when we were there, that was made by the Nazis.
It's
It's
there now.
their destruction. How they destroyed Lidice. And in the audience, I was wondering, like, you know, who would be visiting this? There were so many older women from various countries in Eastern Europe with babushkas, you know, stuff like that, who were there in the audience. And you couldn't take, nobody could take a breath. I mean, everything was so horrifying. And this is what stands out in my memory. After they had, you know, killed a lot of people, put the women and old people on trucks and carted them off to concentration camps, killed the men, just shot them down. They then bulldozed buildings, and they set fires and bulldozed buildings. And then they drove a truck, I guess it was, around with somebody sitting on the tailgate with a motion picture camera photographing the rubble. Now, by this time, you had seen all this mayhem and murder and everything. Nobody was like breathing. It was just like complete silence. And as the camera panned over the rubble, there was a puppy with a broken neck lying there. And in the audience, everybody went, oh, it's like the rest had been so horrible. They couldn't vent it. But that was the release. It was, it was a moment I couldn't forget. And of course, all the time I'm sitting there with the Vietnamese and thinking, this is what's happening in their country. This kind of savage behavior by a conquering power looking on the people as nothing, that they're just to be dispersed, removed, But yeah, that was a fantastic trip. But anyway, they had a Czech driver that took the Vietnamese around. They didn't drive around themselves. I guess it was like the arrangement they had. The Czech government would provide them with a driver and with these, there's office space and so on. And we went the last day. I think we went on a picnic, and the Czech driver spoke some English, so I was able to talk to him, and it was really interesting because. We were just chatting, and he said how he was going to go to the Alps for a couple of weeks because he loved to ski on his vacation. I said, "Oh, great!" I said, "You get 2 weeks vacation. That's great." And he said, 2 weeks? I said, "Well, how much vacation do you get?" He said, "Well, I get 6 weeks vacation." I said, "You get 6 weeks vacation?" He said, "Oh, sure." I said, "Do you know in the United States?" You have to work for many, many years just to get 2 weeks vacation. And you hardly ever get more than that. And he said, "Well, I've been working." He was a man in his 40s. He says, "I've been working my whole life." And I said, "Yeah, but you haven't been working for the Vietnamese your whole life. You've only been working for them for a year or so." He said, "Well, what difference does that make?" I couldn't get him to see how, because, there was just this idea that the U.S. was so wonderful and conditions were so great. And I could see him sort of like, almost a glazed look come on his face, like, "Oh, I don't want to hear this anti-U.S. stuff."
Yeah. That's funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
The impression that America gives out to the world. It's, I remember years ago, I was travelling in China and getting into this debate with this Chinese chap who was absolutely convinced there was no poverty in the United States. Absolutely convinced. He was like, no, and he would not believe it. Because how can you possibly believe it when you
know how rich it is?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But this is what I was saying. It doesn't make sense. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
No, it's.
Yeah. But anyway, so that was the first time I met the Vietnamese.
So you met them more than once, did you? Or?
I stayed there for a week, and I had meetings with them every day.
Yeah.
And
and
they wanted to know about the anti-war movement in the United States. I told them what I knew, and then I took a lot of what they had told me and wrote about it. After I came back, and this was in '65. It was in the summer of '65.
And this was in the capacity of the War Crimes Tribunal?
No, that was before. That was Youth Against War and Fascism. That was because when we had that first demonstration, we were absolutely flabbergasted. Ho Chi Minh gave an interview with Wilfred Burchett, in which he thanked us.
Wow.
And we thought, wow,
Yeah.
we're just a little youth group. Ho Chi Minh is thanking us.
Yeah. That's
because
amazing.
we didn't know anybody there then,
Yeah.
It was
That's
just
amazing.
Yeah.
So then they asked for you to go, or the Czechs asked for you?
No, the Czechs didn't have much of anything to do with it. I think it was directly corresponding with them. I wonder if I don't remember exactly how. I mean, I think we just started to send We found out that the NLF had an office in Prague. We began to send them materials.
Yeah.
And then I think, somebody in our group said, let's send somebody over there. So
Yeah.
they sent me over.
So it was just you on alone?
Yeah, I just went by myself. It
Yeah.
was my first trip to Europe.
What a great first trip to Europe.
Yeah.
You saw the best of it, meeting the Vietnamese.
I came through Paris on the way back, and it was
Wow.
kind of interesting because there were quite a few Americans who were almost like hippies, but amazing. I mean, some of them wound up, I know, spending the rest of their lives in Cuba.
Yeah.
Because I know some of them. And they were there, and they were just looking for, they lived, just out of a backpack.
Mm.
I stayed with this one young woman, don't even remember how I got to know her, and she was in a flat in Paris, and it was cold, and it was all big buildings, but older buildings, and the toilets were like out in it was like a outhouse,
Yeah.
and no hot water, and that's where a lot of people lived, I mean, I guess they never recovered from the war. But there was a lot of young Americans at that time, just kind of looking to see what could they do, and traveling around, and so that's how I wound up in Paris. And then I guess, I came back. No, maybe. Oh, yes, I did stop. I'd stopped in London, and that's when I met Ralph Shulman and the
Right.
Peace Council for the Peace Foundation for the first time.
Yeah.
And then from there, I came back to the United States, and then we were in touch for on a bunch of these things, the photographs, the Mark Lane's schedule. I
Yeah.
have a bunch of letters I didn't pull out because they just had to do with stuff involving them wanting to get, Mark Lane to come over and speak
Right.
about the Kennedy assassination, things like that. It was all happening all around the same time,
And you still in contact with Ralph today?
I think Ralph is dead.
I think he's alive. I think he is alive.
Didn't I see something recently that he had
Maybe
died?
if it's very recent. Yeah, I tried to
Google
contact him.
Google him. I think he died recently. Maybe I could be wrong. I don't trust my memory,
Well,
but I
he's
remember
certainly
seeing
getting on a bit.
someone had died recently.
Right.
That from that period, and I thought, oh gee.
Actually, interestingly,
No, it was Mark Lane who died. Maybe it was Mark Lane.
in the
maybe
Times
it was-
today, I saw the obituary from Michael Herr. Actually, I don't know if did you ever read Dispatches? Journalist wrote a book called Dispatches
No.
on the war experience.
Hey, you want to go out?
it's,
You want to go out?
I'll stop this.
Are you hungry?